Flint, Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I offer this amendment. I represent Flint, Michigan, and Saginaw, Michigan, two cities that have dealt with significant violence, and there are cities across the country that are plagued with extreme violence and are unable themselves, these communities, to deal with the challenges, simply having the resources to sorts of crime that they're seeing every day. On occasion, the ATF has been able to provide support to these communities through their Violent Crime Reduction Partnership Program, so-called SURGE. What my amendment would do would be to provide an additional $15 million to the ATF's budget to conduct additional SURGE operations in America's most violent communities. As I said, there's a high correlation between communities experiencing serious violence, high rates of murder and other violent crime, and cities that are experiencing enormous problems, significant financial stress, such that they simply don't have the resources to deal with the tidal wave of violence, and in fact, in many cases, see the loss of police and prosecutorial capacity. This amendment would address that by allowing ATF to utilize the additional funding to support those communities, those most violent communities. It makes a difference. It pays off. In 2012, when a surge was executed in my hometown of Flint, the murder rate, the homicide rate, was cut in half for that period. In Oakland, California, we saw violent crime go down in just a 4-month period by 14%. These programs do work because what they do is that they support those local law enforcement officials, local prosecutors, to make cases against the most violent offenders. It's really an important thing. The offset, and I know this will rankle some, and I know the chairman is particularly concerned about this, as is the ranking member, and I completely understand it. The offset comes from the NASA Exploration Fund. I understand and I support the work, don't get me wrong, and the important priority that this Congress places on the work that NASA is doing in this regard. But from my perspective, I think it's important that we keep, for this conversation, a sense of priority and proportion. In the case of NASA's budget for exploration, we see a $191 million increase over what was requested. And I understand if we could do that, and if we could do that and still deal with the other priorities, I'd be all for it. But when I see my hometown and other cities like it literally seeing their kids die because we don't have adequate resources to deal with the violence, it seems to me reasonable to take a small portion of a very large increase in funding to an important program, don't get me wrong, a very important program, but to take a small portion of an increase in order to support this kind of work that the ATF is doing, when if I could turn to the ATF and say, use your increased budget to fund this, I would certainly be willing to say that. But in this case, what we see is the ATF with a modest reduction over what was being proposed, what was requested, and the budget within NASA that I'm addressing seeing $191 million added. It's a question of competing important priorities. I understand. Where I live and where I come from, it is very difficult for me to find a higher priority than getting resources to help make cases against the bad guys who are killing kids on the streets of America's most violent cities. With that, I yield.